The thunder of approaching hooves sent Teresa Walsh scrambling through the darkness, her hands scraping against cold earth as she dropped into the root cellar behind the ranch house, praying whoever lived here would not discover her before those men rode past. She pulled the wooden door closed above her head just as lantern light swept across the yard, and she pressed herself against sacks of potatoes, breathing as quietly as her racing heart would allow. Isaac Lawson had been checking the fence line when he spotted the riders, 5 men moving too deliberately across his property to be passing through by chance. He rode back to his ranch house outside Laramie, Wyoming Territory, in the spring of 1878, and noticed immediately that his root cellar door sat slightly askew. He approached slowly, his hand resting on his revolver, and pulled the door open. The woman who stared up at him had dirt on her face and terror in her dark eyes. She could not have been more than 22 or 23, with tangled brown hair falling from what had once been a neat bun. Her dress was torn at the hem, and her hands were bleeding from what looked like a hard ride through rough country. "Please," she whispered, "please do not tell them I am here." Isaac glanced toward the road where dust still hung in the air from the riders who had passed. He looked back at the woman and made his decision. "Come inside the house. Now." She hesitated, clearly weighing whether he presented more danger than whoever she was running from. He holstered his weapon and offered his hand. "I am not going to hurt you. But if those men come back and find you in my cellar, there will be questions I cannot answer. Inside, you are a guest." Teresa took his hand and let him pull her up into the fading daylight. He was tall, probably in his late 20s, with dark hair and steady blue eyes that held no malice. She followed him into the ranch house, her legs shaking with exhaustion and fear. The house was simple but clean, clearly the home of a man who lived alone but took care of his space. He guided her to a chair at the wooden table and poured water from a pitcher. She drank gratefully while he moved to the window watching the road. "Who are they?" he asked without turning around. "Men from Denver," she said quietly. "Working for Marcus Cunningham." Isaac turned at that name. Everyone in Wyoming Territory had heard of Marcus Cunningham, a man who had made his fortune in silver and expanded into cattle, railroads, and anything else that promised power. He was known to be ruthless in business, and allegedly more ruthless with people who crossed him. "What did you do to catch his attention?" Teresa set down the cup, her hands trembling. "I witnessed something I should not have. 3 months ago, I was working as a bookkeeper in his Denver office. I stayed late one night to finish the quarterly reports, and I heard arguing in his private office. I knew I should leave, but then I heard a gunshot." Isaac moved to sit across from her, listening intently. "I hid behind the filing cabinets. Cunningham and 2 of his men dragged out the body of James Porter, a federal marshal who had been investigating him. I heard them discussing how they would make it look like Porter died during a robbery. I waited until they left, then I ran." "Did they see you?" "Not that night. But the next day, I did not come to work. I think they realized someone might have been there. His men came to my boarding house, but I had already left. I have been running for 3 months, taking odd jobs, staying ahead of them, but they are persistent." Isaac stood and moved to the stove, stoking the fire and setting a pot on to heat. "You must be hungry. When did you last eat?" "Yesterday morning. Some bread a farmer's wife gave me when I helped her hang laundry." He began pulling out ingredients, moving with the competence of someone accustomed to feeding himself. "You are safe here. Those men will not find you in this house." "You do not know that," Teresa said, her voice breaking slightly. "They are determined, and Cunningham has money and influence. He can buy sheriffs, judges, anyone he needs." Isaac turned to face her, his expression serious but calm. "Miss, I have lived on this land for 5 years. I built this ranch with my own hands after I left the cavalry. I have faced Sioux war parties, rustlers, claim jumpers, and winters that would freeze a man solid. I am not afraid of hired thugs from Denver, no matter who signs their pay. Something in his steady confidence made Teresa want to believe him. She had been alone and terrified for so long that the simple declaration felt like a lifeline. "Why would you help me?" she asked. "You do not know me. This could bring you trouble." He returned to cooking, cracking eggs into a pan. "My mother always said a man's character is measured by what he does when it costs him something. Besides, I cannot abide bullies, especially ones who think money puts them above justice." They ate in relative silence, Teresa too hungry and exhausted to make conversation. Isaac did not press her with more questions. When she finished, he showed her to a small room off the main living area. "This was meant to be a guest room, though I have not had many guests. You can rest here. The door has a lock on the inside if that makes you feel safer." Teresa looked at the simple bed with its clean quilts and nearly cried. She had not slept in an actual bed since leaving Denver. "Thank you, Mr. Lawson." "Isaac," he corrected. "And you are Teresa Walsh." "Get some sleep, Teresa. We will figure out what to do in the morning." She locked the door after he left, not because she feared him, but because the habit of security had become ingrained. She removed her boots and lay down fully clothed, intending to rest for just a few minutes, but within seconds she was deeply asleep. Isaac sat at his table in the main room, cleaning his rifle and thinking. He had told Teresa the truth when he said he was not afraid, but he was not foolish either. Men like Cunningham did not stop hunting until they got what they wanted. If they believed Teresa could testify against them for murder, they would pursue her relentlessly. He considered his options. Laramie had a sheriff, but as Teresa suggested, lawmen could be bought. The territorial marshal might be trustworthy, but getting Teresa to Fort Laramie to make a statement meant traveling exposed on the open road. And there was no guarantee that Cunningham's influence did not reach there as well. For now, the best option was to keep her hidden and safe while he gathered information. He had friends in Laramie, people he trusted. He could find out if those riders were still in the area and what story they were telling. Over the next few days, Isaac made discreet inquiries in town. The 5 men were staying at the Laramie Hotel, claiming to be cattle buyers looking for ranch property. But they asked too many questions about strangers and homesteads, and they paid too well for information. The townsfolk were wary of them. Meanwhile, Teresa began to recover her strength. On the second morning, she insisted on helping with chores despite Isaac's protests that she was a guest. She proved capable with cooking and helped him organize his chaotic storage room. They fell into an easy routine, and Isaac found himself enjoying the company more than he expected. "You have built something solid here," Teresa observed one afternoon as they mended a section of fence together. She had borrowed some of his older work clothes, rolling up the sleeves and pant legs. "How much land do you have?" 320 acres. "I filed a homestead claim and then bought the adjacent property from a family that decided Wyoming winters were too harsh. I run about 200 head of cattle, plus some horses." "You manage it all yourself?" "Mostly. I hire help during roundup and when I drive cattle to market. But day to day it is just me." He paused in his work, looking across his land. "I like the solitude most of the time. After the cavalry, I wanted space and quiet." "What made you leave the service?" Isaac was quiet for a moment. "I served for 6 years, mostly in the Indian Wars. After a while, I started questioning what we were doing and why. The final straw was watching a village of peaceful Arapaho being forced from land they had every right to occupy, because some politician in Washington decided it would be better used by white settlers. I realized I did not want to be part of that anymore. Teresa studied his profile, seeing the conflict in his expression. That must have been a difficult decision. It was the right one. I did my duty as I understood it, but continuing would have meant betraying something in myself. He returned to working on the fence. "What about you? How did you end up keeping books for a man like Cunningham?" "Necessity," she said simply. "My father was a schoolteacher in Chicago. He made sure I had a good education, which was unusual for a girl. When he died 4 years ago, my mother and I had to support ourselves. She took in sewing, and I found work as a clerk. We moved to Denver 2 years ago because she had a sister there. When my mother died last year, I was alone. The job with Cunningham paid well, and I did not ask too many questions about his business. I should have been more careful. You could not have known what you would witness." "No, but I knew the kind of man he was. Everyone did. I told myself it was not my concern as long as I did honest work. I was wrong." They worked in comfortable silence after that, and Isaac found himself noticing small things about her. The way she concentrated when focusing on a task, the quick intelligence in her eyes, the determined set of her jaw. She had been through something traumatic and was still frightened, but she was not broken. There was steel in Teresa Walsh. That evening, as they prepared dinner together, Isaac said, "I need to tell you something. Those men are still in Laramie. They are staying at the hotel and asking questions." Teresa's hand stilled over the vegetables she was cutting. "They know I am here." "No. They are asking about strangers in general, checking farms and ranches, but they will eventually work their way out here. We need to decide what to do before that happens." "I should leave," Teresa said immediately. "I have put you in enough danger already." "Where would you go? They are watching the roads, the stage stations, the railway. You would not make it a day." "Then what do you suggest?" Isaac had been considering this carefully. "If they come here, you will not be running and hiding. You will be my wife visiting from back east. Your name is Teresa Lawson, and you have been here for 2 months. The hands I hire for Roundup will back that story. They are loyal and dislike outsiders asking questions." Teresa stared at him. "You want me to pretend to be married to you. It is the best protection I can offer. A woman traveling alone they will pursue. A married woman established on a ranch with a husband is a different story. It gives you legitimacy and makes their questions seem more suspicious." "Isaac, that is asking too much. If they discover the deception, it could implicate you as an accomplice." He met her eyes steadily. "Teresa, I made a choice when I helped you out of that cellar. I am not going to send you out there to face them alone. This is the best way to keep you safe." She wanted to argue, but the logic was sound. And truthfully, the thought of leaving this ranch, leaving him, filled her with dread. In just a few days, she had begun to feel something she had not experienced in months, which was security. "All right," she agreed quietly. "But if this goes wrong, you tell them I deceived you. You say I lied about who I was and you had no idea about my past. It will not come to that." 3 days later, 2 of Cunningham's men rode up to the ranch house. Isaac saw them coming and called to Teresa, who was in the kitchen. She quickly removed her apron, smoothed her hair, which she had pinned up neatly, and took a deep breath. Isaac opened the door before they could knock. The men were typical hired muscle, hard-eyed and armed. The taller one touched his hat brim in a mockery of politeness. "Afternoon. We are looking for someone, and we are checking all the ranches in the area. Have you seen a woman traveling alone, dark hair, about 22 years old?" "I have not seen any women traveling alone," Isaac said truthfully. "What did she do?" "That is not your concern. We just need to find her." Teresa appeared in the doorway behind Isaac, moving to his side with the comfortable familiarity of a wife. "Is something wrong?" The men looked at her with interest. She matched the general description, but her demeanor was entirely wrong. She stood confidently, her hand resting lightly on Isaac's arm, clearly at home. "Just asking about a woman who might be in the area," the shorter man said. "You have not had any visitors?" "No visitors," Teresa said pleasantly. "It has been quite quiet, which suits me. I am still adjusting to ranch life." She smiled at Isaac with what appeared to be genuine affection. "My husband keeps promising it will get easier." "Where are you from, madam?" "Chicago originally. We were married there 2 months ago, and I accompanied Isaac back to Wyoming." "It is certainly different from city life," she laughed lightly. "I am still learning to cook on a wood stove." The men exchanged glances. This woman was too settled, too comfortable. If she had been running for months, she would show signs of stress and fear. Instead, she seemed merely like an Eastern bride adapting to frontier life. "Sorry to bother you folks," the tall one said, though his tone suggested no apology. "If you do see anyone, there is a reward for information." "We will keep that in mind," Isaac said, his tone making it clear the conversation was over. After the men rode away, Teresa sagged against the doorframe, her composure crumbling. Isaac closed the door and steadied her with his hands on her shoulders. "You were perfect," he said. They believed it completely. I was terrified. What if they had asked more questions? What if they wanted proof? They did not, and they will not. To them, you are just another rancher's wife. He guided her to a chair. "But we need to maintain the appearance now. If anyone asks, the story is the same. Isaac, I realize this means I cannot just leave when this is over. If people believe we are married, my departing would raise questions." He had thought about this too. "We will handle that when the time comes. For now, the important thing is keeping you safe." As spring turned toward summer, Teresa and Isaac continued their charade, though increasingly it felt less like pretense. They worked side by side every day, and Isaac found himself looking forward to her company. She was intelligent and curious, asking questions about ranching and learning quickly. She could ride now, having practiced on his gentlest mare, and she helped him with the cattle. In the evenings, they sat together talking about everything and nothing. Teresa told him about growing up in Chicago, about her father's love of literature, and how he had read Shakespeare and Dickens to her. Isaac shared stories from his cavalry days, the parts that were not too dark, and his dreams for expanding the ranch. One night in early June, they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. Teresa had been quiet all day, and Isaac sensed something troubling her. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. She was silent for a long moment. "I am thinking that I have been here for 2 months, and I find myself not wanting this to end. This life, this place, being with you. And I know that is foolish because this is not real. We are playing roles." Isaac turned to look at her, his heart beating faster. What if it could be real? Teresa met his eyes, searching for his meaning. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that somewhere along the way, this stopped feeling like an act to me. I look forward to seeing you every morning. I find myself wanting to share things with you, wanting to hear your thoughts. When I picture the future of this ranch, you are in it." "Isaac," she whispered, "you do not have to say this. You have already done so much for me." He took her hand, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. "I am not saying it out of obligation. I am saying it because it is true. I have fallen in love with you, Teresa. If you do not feel the same, I will understand and we will continue as we have been. But I needed you to know." Tears gathered in her eyes, but she was smiling. "I have been falling in love with you since that first night when you pulled me out of the cellar and told me I was safe. I kept telling myself it was just gratitude, just relief at being protected. But it is more than that. You are kind and strong and honorable, and being with you feels like coming home." Isaac cupped her face in his hand, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. Instead, she leaned into his touch, and then he was kissing her softly, tentatively, as if she were something precious he was afraid to break. Teresa kissed him back, her hand coming up to rest against his chest where she could feel his heart racing. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless. Isaac rested his forehead against hers. "I want to do this right. I want to truly marry you, not just pretend. I want you to be my wife in every sense." "I want that too," Teresa said, "but we cannot, not while those men are still looking." A marriage license would be a public record. If they found it and checked the date, they would know we lied. She was right, and Isaac felt frustration at the situation. "Then we wait. But Teresa, I am asking you now, when this is over, when you are truly safe, will you marry me?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you." They sealed the promise with another kiss, and that night Teresa did not sleep in the guest room. Isaac held her in his arms, both of them knowing they were crossing a line but unable to resist any longer. Their coming together was tender and passionate, a confirmation of feelings that had been building for months. The next morning, Isaac woke before dawn to find Teresa still sleeping beside him, her hair spread across his pillow. He watched her peaceful face and felt a fierce protectiveness. He had to find a way to resolve this situation, to make her truly safe so they could build the life they both wanted. He dressed quietly and went into town, seeking out Tom Brennan, the town's newspaper editor and one of the few men Isaac trusted completely. Tom was in his office, as always, surrounded by papers and the smell of ink. "Isaac, good to see you. How is that wife of yours settling in?" Isaac closed the door behind him. "Tom, I need your help, and I need you to keep what I am about to tell you in complete confidence." The editor's expression grew serious. "You know you can trust me." Isaac laid out the whole story, from finding Teresa in his cellar to the lie about their marriage. Tom listened without interrupting, his reporter's mind clearly working through the implications. "Marcus Cunningham," Tom said finally. "That is a dangerous enemy to make, but if what your Teresa says is true, he murdered a federal marshal. That needs to be exposed." "How?" "She is one witness and he has money and influence. Who would believe her?" Tom leaned back in his chair, thinking. James Porter was not investigating Cunningham alone. He would have been working with other marshals, possibly federal prosecutors. If we could get Teresa to them safely, get her testimony on record with people beyond Cunningham's reach, that might be enough. "How do we do that without Cunningham's men finding out?" "Let me make some inquiries. I have contacts with newspapers in Denver and Cheyenne. If Porter was a federal marshal, his death would have been reported. There might be information about the investigation he was conducting." Tom paused. "This is a hell of a story, Isaac. If we can break this, it would bring down one of the most powerful men in the territory." "I do not care about the story. I care about keeping Teresa safe." "I understand, but bringing Cunningham to justice is the only way to truly accomplish that." "Give me a few days to gather information." Isaac returned to the ranch to find Teresa working in the garden she had started, planting vegetables for the coming season. She looked up when he approached, shading her eyes against the sun. "Where did you go?" "To town." "I spoke with Tom Brennan, the newspaper editor. I trust him and I think he can help us." Teresa stood, brushing dirt from her hands. "What did you tell him?" "Everything. Before you get angry, hear me out. Tom has connections with newspapers and law enforcement across the territory. If anyone can find out about the investigation Porter was conducting, it is him. And if we can connect Teresa to the right people, people beyond Cunningham's influence, you can testify safely." Teresa wanted to be upset that he had revealed their secret, but she could see the logic. "Do you truly trust him, with my life and yours?" She nodded slowly. "All right, we do this your way." Over the next week, Tom Brennan worked his sources. He discovered that James Porter had indeed been investigating Marcus Cunningham for multiple crimes including bribery, fraud, and suspected involvement in the disappearance of a rival businessman. The investigation had not died with Porter. Two other federal marshals had taken over, but they had been stymied by lack of evidence and witnesses who were too frightened to testify. Tom sent telegrams carefully, not mentioning names that might alert Cunningham's people. He eventually made contact with Marshal Daniel Garrett, who was leading the continued investigation from Cheyenne. Garrett was intensely interested in the possibility of a witness to Porter's murder. The plan they devised was risky but necessary. Marshal Garrett would come to Laramie quietly without announcing his presence. He would meet with Teresa at the ranch, take her formal statement, and arrange for her to testify before a federal judge. With her testimony, they could obtain warrants for Cunningham's arrest. On a hot July afternoon, Marshal Garrett arrived at the ranch. He was a weathered man in his 50s, with gray hair and sharp eyes that assessed everything. He listened to Teresa's account with careful attention, asking detailed questions about what she had seen and heard that night. "Miss Walsh, your testimony could be crucial," he said when she finished. "But I will not mislead you about the risks. Cunningham will use every resource to discredit you or prevent you from testifying. We can offer you protection, but there are no absolute guarantees." "I understand," Teresa said. "But I cannot keep running forever. And what I saw, a man was murdered. He deserves justice." Garrett nodded approvingly. "There is a federal judge in Denver who has been wanting a reason to investigate Cunningham. He is honest and he is not afraid. With your testimony, I believe we can get warrants and make arrests before Cunningham knows what is happening. Can you travel to Denver next week?" Isaac immediately said, "I am going with her." "I expected nothing less," Garrett said. "Tom Brennan will accompany you as well, as a witness and to document the proceedings for his newspaper. Exposing this publicly will help ensure Cunningham cannot bury it quietly." They made plans for the journey. Isaac and Teresa would travel by rail from Laramie to Cheyenne, and then to Denver, with Garrett and two other marshals providing protection. Tom would meet them in Denver. The night before they were to leave, Teresa and Isaac lay awake in bed, holding each other close. "Are you frightened?" Isaac asked. "Terrified," she admitted, "but also relieved. This has been hanging over me for so long, I want it finished. After this is done, after you testify and Cunningham is dealt with, we will come back here and get married properly. I want to stand up in church with the whole town watching and make you my wife." Teresa smiled in the darkness. "I want that too. I want to build a real life here with you, no more hiding or pretending. We will have that, I promise you." The journey to Denver was tense but uneventful. The marshals kept a careful watch, but they saw no sign of Cunningham's men. In Denver, they went directly to the federal courthouse, where Judge Harrison Whitmore heard Teresa's testimony in his private chambers. The judge was a stern, gray, bearded man who listened with fierce attention. When Teresa described what she had witnessed, his expression grew darker. He asked pointed questions, establishing details and timeline, and then he leaned back in his chair. "Miss Walsh, I have wanted reason to investigate Marcus Cunningham for years. The man is corrupt to his core, but he has been clever about hiding his crimes. Your testimony gives me what I need." He turned to Marshal Garrett. "I am issuing warrants for Cunningham and the two men Miss Walsh described. I want them arrested today, and I want them held without bail pending trial." "Yes, Your Honor." Whitmore looked back at Teresa. "You will need to testify at trial, which will not happen for several weeks. Until then, I want you under marshal protection. Cunningham has many friends in Denver, and I do not want you at risk." "She will be protected, Your Honor," Isaac said firmly. "I will make sure of that." The arrest of Marcus Cunningham was front-page news across the territory. Tom Brennan wrote a detailed account of the crimes, Teresa's witness testimony, and the corruption that had allowed Cunningham to operate unchecked. Other newspapers picked up the story, and suddenly there was intense public scrutiny on the case. Cunningham's lawyers attempted every legal maneuver to dismiss the charges, but Judge Whitmore was unmoved. The trial was scheduled for late August, giving the prosecution time to build their case around Teresa's testimony. Isaac and Teresa stayed in Denver, in a hotel under guard by federal marshals. It was strange after the openness of the ranch, but they were together, and that was what mattered. They spent their days walking the guarded corridors, talking about the future, making plans for the ranch. "I want to expand the cattle operation," Isaac said one afternoon. "With what beef prices are bringing, we could double the herd in a few years, and I have been thinking about breeding horses, quality stock for the cavalry and ranchers." "That sounds ambitious," Teresa said, smiling at his enthusiasm. "What about a family? Do you want children?" "I do," Isaac said, taking her hand. "I want sons and daughters, a house full of noise and life. I want to teach them about the land, about honor and hard work. Do you want that?" "Very much. I always hoped for a family, but after my parents died, I thought that dream might have died with them. Now, with you, it feels possible again." The trial began on a sweltering August day. The courthouse was packed with spectators, reporters, and curious onlookers. Cunningham sat at the defense table looking supremely confident, surrounded by expensive lawyers. His two associates, the men who had actually killed Porter, looked less certain. The prosecution built their case methodically. They presented evidence of Cunningham's criminal enterprises, the suspicious circumstances of Porter's death, and witness testimony about Cunningham's threats and intimidation tactics. But the centerpiece was Teresa's testimony. She took the stand on the third day of the trial, wearing a simple but respectable dress. Isaac sat in the front row where she could see him, his presence giving her strength. She told her story clearly and without embellishment, describing exactly what she had seen and heard that night in Cunningham's office. Cunningham's lead attorney, a sharp-featured man named Caldwell, attempted to shake her testimony during cross-examination. He suggested she had misunderstood what she witnessed, that perhaps Porter's death was self-defense, that her months of running had colored her memories. But Teresa remained steady, repeating her account without variation. "Miss Walsh," Caldwell said with false sympathy, "is it not true that you have been living with Isaac Lawson, unmarried, for months? How can we trust the word of a woman of such questionable morals?" Isaac started to rise from his seat, but Marshal Garrett put a hand on his shoulder. The prosecutor objected strenuously, and Judge Whitmore sustained it. "Mr. Caldwell, the witness's personal life has no bearing on what she saw and heard. You will confine your questions to the events in question, or I will hold you in contempt." The defense had no effective rebuttal to Teresa's testimony. The evidence supported her account, and her credibility remained intact. After a week of trial, the jury deliberated for only 3 hours before returning guilty verdicts against all 3 defendants. Cunningham was sentenced to hang for the murder of a federal marshal. His 2 associates received similar sentences. As the verdicts were read, Cunningham's composure finally cracked. He stared at Teresa with undisguised hatred, but Marshal Garrett and his deputies quickly removed the convicted men from the courtroom. Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded Teresa and Isaac. Tom Brennan ran interference, allowing them to make a brief statement before escaping to their waiting carriage. "It is over," Teresa said as they rode back to the hotel. "It is truly over. You were incredibly brave in there," Isaac said, holding her close. "I was so proud of you." That evening, they celebrated quietly in their hotel room with Tom and Marshal Garrett. The marshal raised his glass in a toast to justice and to a brave young woman who refused to stay silent. "Miss Walsh, you did something today that few people have the courage to do. You stood up against power and corruption and won." "I could not have done it without help," Teresa said, looking at Isaac, "without people who believed me and protected me." The next morning, they took the train back to Laramie. As they approached the town, Teresa felt genuine happiness for the first time in months. This was home now, truly home, and she was returning to build a life with the man she loved. The ranch looked beautiful in the late summer sun as they rode up the drive. The cattle were fat and healthy in the pastures, the buildings stood solid and welcoming, and the garden Teresa had planted was flourishing. "Welcome home, Mrs. Lawson," Isaac said with a smile, "or you will be soon officially." "When should we get married?" Teresa asked. "As soon as possible. I have waited long enough to make an honest woman of you." They were married 3 weeks later, in the small church in Laramie with half the town in attendance. Teresa wore a dress of pale blue silk that she had ordered from a seamstress in town, and Isaac wore his best suit. Tom Brennan stood as best man, and the innkeeper's wife, who had befriended Teresa, served as matron of honor. The pastor, a kindly man named Reverend Miles, spoke about love and courage, about two people who had found each other in difficult circumstances and built something strong. When Isaac slipped the simple gold band on Teresa's finger and said his vows, his voice was steady and sure. Teresa's voice trembled slightly with emotion, but her words were clear. "I, Teresa Walsh, take you, Isaac Lawson, to be my lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish till death do us part." When the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, Isaac kissed Teresa to applause and cheers from the congregation. As they walked back down the aisle together, Teresa saw nothing but happiness ahead. The wedding celebration continued at the Laramie Hotel, where the townspeople had organized a reception. There was food, music, and dancing. Isaac proved to be a surprisingly good dancer, guiding Teresa through waltzes and reels with easy confidence. "Where did a cavalry officer turned rancher learn to dance?" she teased. "My mother insisted all her sons learn. She said a gentleman needed to know how to comport himself in society, even if he spent most of his time with horses and cattle. I should like to meet her someday. She lives in Missouri with my younger brother. I will write to her and tell her about you. She will be delighted I finally married." As the evening wore on and they finally returned to the ranch, now truly their home together, Isaac carried Teresa over the threshold despite her laughing protests. He set her down gently in the main room, which looked the same as always but somehow felt entirely different. "I love you, Teresa Lawson," he said, pulling her into his arms. "I love you, Isaac. Thank you for saving me, for believing in me, for giving me a home. You gave me just as much. This house was empty before you arrived. You made it a home." They moved to the bedroom they now shared fully and without reservation, and their wedding night was tender and passionate, a celebration of everything they had overcome and everything they were building together. The months that followed were the happiest of Teresa's life. She and Isaac worked together to expand the ranch, purchasing additional cattle and beginning the horse breeding program Isaac had envisioned. Teresa proved to have a natural talent for working with horses, particularly the young ones who needed patient handling. They hired 2 ranch hands that fall, young men from town who were hardworking and reliable. With additional help, Isaac could focus on improving the property, and Teresa had more time to develop other aspects of the ranch. She started keeping chickens and expanded the garden, preserving vegetables for winter. She also took over the ranch's bookkeeping, putting her skills to good use tracking expenses and profits. In November, Teresa realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but waited to be certain before telling Isaac. She chose a quiet evening after dinner when they were sitting by the fire. "Isaac, I have something to tell you." He looked up from the ledger he was reviewing. "What is it?" "I am expecting a baby. In early June, I think." The ledger slid from Isaac's lap as he stood abruptly, crossing to where Teresa sat. He knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "Truly, truly. Are you happy?" Happy does not begin to cover it. He pulled her into an embrace, his face buried against her neck. When he pulled back, his eyes were bright. "A baby, our child. Teresa, this is wonderful." "I was hoping you would think so. I know it will mean changes, more work. Good changes. The best kind." He kissed her softly. "Are you feeling all right? Do you need anything? Should we send for a doctor?" Teresa laughed at his sudden, worried concern. "I am fine. Women have babies every day. But yes, we should arrange for a doctor or midwife closer to the time." Isaac became almost comically protective as Teresa's pregnancy progressed. He insisted she not lift anything heavy, worried when she rode horses, and fussed over her meals to ensure she was eating enough. Teresa found it endearing, even when it was excessive. The winter was harsh, but the ranch was prepared. They had ample supplies. The livestock were sheltered and fed, and the house was snug against the cold. Teresa spent the long evening sewing baby clothes and blankets, while Isaac worked on building a cradle from smooth pine wood. In March, they received news that Marcus Cunningham had been hanged in Denver. His execution had been delayed by various legal appeals, but justice had finally been served. Teresa felt a complex mixture of emotions at the news. She was relieved that the threat was permanently ended, but she took no joy in death, even of someone who had done such evil. "It is finished," Isaac said, holding her as they stood looking out at the snow-covered ranch. "You are completely safe now. He cannot hurt you or anyone else ever again." "I know. I just keep thinking about Marshall Porter, about his family. I hope they have some peace now, knowing his killer faced justice. You gave them that. You were brave enough to come forward when you could have stayed silent and safe." As spring arrived and the snow melted, revealing green grass and wildflowers, Teresa grew large with the baby. The midwife from Laramie, a capable woman named Martha Henning, visited regularly to check on her. Martha assured them both that Teresa was healthy and the baby was growing well. In the first week of June, during a warm afternoon when Isaac was working near the house specifically so he would be close, Teresa's labor began. Isaac immediately sent one of the ranch hands to fetch Martha while he stayed with Teresa, trying to hide his anxiety. "I am fine," Teresa assured him, though her face was tight with pain during a contraction. "Women do this all the time. That does not make me any less worried about you." Martha arrived within the hour and took charge with brisk efficiency. She sent Isaac out of the bedroom despite his protests, though she allowed him back in when Teresa insisted she wanted him there. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the afternoon and into the evening. Isaac held Teresa's hand, wiped her face with cool cloths, and murmured encouragement even as he silently prayed for her safety. Finally, as the sun set in brilliant orange and gold, their son was born. The baby's cry filled the room, strong and healthy. Martha cleaned him quickly and placed him in Teresa's arms. He was red-faced and squalling, with dark hair and eyes that would probably settle to blue like his father's. "He is perfect," Teresa whispered, tears streaming down her face as she looked at their son. "Isaac, look at him. He is perfect." Isaac could barely speak past the lump in his throat. He gently touched the baby's tiny hand, marveling as the little fingers curled around his own. "He is beautiful. You did so well, Teresa. I am so proud of you." They named him Matthew Jacob Lawson, Matthew after Isaac's father and Jacob after Teresa's. The baby thrived from the start, nursing well and growing rapidly. Isaac was a devoted father, taking turns walking Matthew when he fussed at night, changing diapers without complaint, and spending hours simply holding his son and marveling at him. Tom Brennan visited a few weeks after Matthew's birth, bringing gifts and congratulations. He had been promoted to chief editor of his newspaper and was considering starting his own publication. "You three are quite the story," Tom said, holding Matthew carefully while Teresa prepared coffee. "From root cellar to respectability, from witness to wife and mother." "It would make a compelling book." "Absolutely not," Teresa said firmly. "We have had enough notoriety. I want Matthew to grow up in peace without his family's past being constant gossip." "Fair enough. But I hope you know how much good your courage did." Cunningham's organization collapsed after his execution. Dozens of corrupt officials and businessmen have been exposed and removed from power. You helped clean up the territory. "That makes it worthwhile," Teresa said. "But now I just want to focus on my family and our life here." The years passed in a rhythm of ranch work and family life. Matthew grew into a sturdy, curious boy who followed his father everywhere, learning about cattle and horses almost before he could walk properly. When Matthew was 3, Teresa gave birth to their daughter, Sarah Louise. 2 years later, another son arrived whom they named Daniel Thomas. The ranch prospered under their joint management. Isaac expanded the horse breeding program, developing a reputation for quality stock that brought buyers from across the territory. Teresa managed the household, raised the children, and kept meticulous financial records that allowed them to make smart investments and weather difficult seasons. Laramie grew and changed around them as Wyoming moved toward statehood. The railroad brought more settlers, the town became more established, and the wild frontier began to fade into something more civilized. Through it all, the Lawson Ranch remained a constant, a place of hard work, family, and love. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Isaac and Teresa took a rare evening away from the children, leaving them with Martha Henning, and rode out to a favorite spot on the ranch. It was a high meadow overlooking the valley, where wildflowers bloomed in profusion, and the sunset painted the sky in brilliant colors. They sat together on the grass, Teresa leaning against Isaac's chest while he held her close. In the distance, they could see their ranch house, the barns and outbuildings, the cattle dotting the pastures. Smoke rose from the chimney where Martha was probably cooking dinner for the children. "Sometimes I still cannot believe this is our life," Teresa said softly. "When I was hiding in that root cellar, terrified and alone, I never imagined I could be this happy. I knew from the moment I saw you that you were going to change my life," Isaac said. "I just did not realize how completely or how wonderfully. Do you ever regret it? Taking me in, putting yourself at risk?" "Never, not for a single moment. You gave me everything I did not know I was missing. A partner, a family, a reason beyond just survival. You made me whole, Teresa." She turned in his arms to face him. "You saved me in every way a person can be saved. You gave me safety, love, a home, a future. I love you more now than I did on our wedding day, and I loved you desperately then." Isaac kissed her, a deep, lingering kiss that held 10 years of love and partnership, When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling. "We should get back," Teresa said reluctantly. "The children will be getting ready for bed soon. In a minute. Let us just stay here a little longer, just the two of us." They sat watching the sunset fade into twilight, the first stars appearing overhead. In the quiet, they could hear the distant sounds of cattle, the wind in the grass, and somewhere far off, a coyote's lonely call. It was the sound of home, of the life they had built together. When they finally rode back to the house, they found the children already in their night clothes. Matthew, now a serious 10-year-old, was reading to Sarah and Daniel, who listened with rapt attention. The scene was so perfect, so exactly what Teresa had dreamed of during those dark months of running and hiding, that she had to pause in the doorway, her heart full. Isaac came up behind her, his hand resting on her shoulder. "This is what we fought for," he said quietly. "This right here." "It was worth it," Teresa said. "Every moment of fear, every risk, it was all worth it for this." They put the children to bed together, listening to prayers and tucking in blankets. Matthew asked his usual dozen questions about the next day's work. Sarah wanted one more story, and Daniel just wanted hugs. When all three were finally settled, Isaac and Teresa retreated to their own room. In the quiet darkness, lying in each other's arms, Teresa thought about the long journey that had brought them here. From terror in a root cellar to the secure love of marriage and family, from being hunted to building a legacy. She had found her safe haven, not just in a place, but in the man who had promised her protection and given her so much more. "What are you thinking about?" Isaac murmured, his hand tracing lazy patterns on her arm. "About how you told me I was safe with you that first day." "You kept that promise, Isaac. You kept me safe in every way that matters." "You kept me safe too," he said. "From loneliness, from a half-lived life. We saved each other, Teresa." She settled closer against him, listening to the steady beat of his heart. Outside, the Wyoming wind whispered across the prairie, carrying the scent of sage and summer grass. Inside, the house was warm and quiet, filled with the peaceful breathing of sleeping children and the love of two people who had found each other against all odds. As sleep began to claim her, Teresa smiled, knowing that tomorrow would bring more hard work, more challenges, more of the endless tasks of ranch life. But it would also bring laughter, love, and the deep satisfaction of building something lasting. She had everything she needed right here in this house, with this man, in this life they had created together. And in the morning, when the sun rose over the mountains and painted the valley in gold, Isaac would be beside her to face it. Just as he had been every morning since she had emerged from that root cellar into his protection, and just as he would be for all the mornings to come. She was safe, she was loved, and she was home. The seasons continued their eternal cycle over the Lawson Ranch. Matthew grew tall and strong, taking on more responsibilities, and showing a natural talent for understanding cattle and horses that made his father proud. Sarah developed a love of books and learning, reminding Teresa of her own father's passion for education. Daniel was the adventurous one, always exploring, always curious about every aspect of the ranch and the wider world. Isaac and Teresa watched their children grow with mingled pride and bittersweet awareness that time was passing too quickly. The ranch continued to prosper, allowing them to make improvements and secure their children's futures. They added a room onto the house as the family grew, built a proper barn for the horse breeding operation, and gradually became one of the most successful ranches in the region. Wyoming achieved statehood in 1890, and the Lawsons celebrated along with their neighbors. The wild frontier of their early years together had transformed into something more settled, though the land itself remained vast and beautiful. Laramie had grown into a proper town with schools, churches, businesses, and a sense of permanence through it all. The love between Isaac and Teresa only deepened. They had built something rare and precious, a true partnership rooted in mutual respect, shared labor, and profound affection. They faced challenges together, from harsh winters to market downturns to the normal trials of raising children, but nothing could shake the foundation they had created. On quiet evenings, when the children were occupied with their own pursuits, Isaac and Teresa still found time to sit together and talk. They discussed plans for the ranch, shared observations about the children, or simply enjoyed each other's company in comfortable silence. Sometimes they reminisced about their early days together, though the fear and danger of that time had faded into distant memory. "You remember how terrified I was when those men came to the ranch," Teresa said one night. "I remember how perfectly you played the role of my wife," Isaac replied with a smile. "You were so composed, so natural. I was amazed by your courage. I was not courageous. I was pretending for my life. You were always courageous. From the moment you witnessed that murder and chose to run rather than stay silent, through everything that followed, your courage brought down a corrupt empire and gave us this life." Teresa kissed him softly. "Our life. Everything we have, we built together." As the years continued to pass, the Lawson children grew into adults themselves. Matthew took over more and more of the ranch operations, showing sound judgment and a good head for business. He married a neighboring rancher's daughter, and they built a home on the far section of the Lawson property, expanding the family enterprise. Sarah fulfilled her love of learning by becoming a teacher, opening a school in Laramie where she taught reading, writing, arithmetic, and literature to children of families who were still arriving to settle in Wyoming. She married a young lawyer, and they built a life in town while remaining close to the family ranch. Daniel, true to his adventurous nature, tried his hand at various pursuits before finding his calling in breeding and training horses. He traveled throughout the West, learning techniques and bloodlines, and eventually returned to the ranch to work alongside his father and brother in expanding that aspect of the business. Isaac and Teresa became grandparents, marveling at the next generation and the way their family continued to grow and flourish. They watched Matthew's son learn to ride, Sarah's daughter learn her letters, Daniel's twin boys explore the ranch with the same curiosity their father had shown. The house that had once been so quiet was now regularly filled with children and grandchildren, laughter and life. On their 25th wedding anniversary, the entire family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. The house and grounds were filled with people, food, music, and joy. As Isaac and Teresa stood together greeting guests, accepting congratulations and watching their children and grandchildren play, Teresa felt overwhelmed with gratitude. "A quarter century," she marveled. 25 years since we stood in that church and made our promises." "Best decision I ever made," Isaac said, his arm around her waist. "Though I think I decided to marry you that first night when I pulled you out of the root cellar." Teresa laughed. "You did not. You were probably wondering what trouble you had gotten yourself into." "Maybe a little," he admitted with a grin. "But I also remember thinking you had the most beautiful eyes I had ever seen, even filled with fear. And I remember feeling something shift in my chest, like my heart knew you before my mind caught up." "That is romantic nonsense," Teresa said, but she was smiling. "Maybe, but it is true nonsense." The celebration continued into the evening with toasts and speeches, dancing and laughter. Tom Brennan, now quite distinguished with silver hair and the owner of his own newspaper chain, gave a toast that brought tears to many eyes. I have known Isaac and Teresa Lawson for 25 years, he said, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd. I watched them face danger together, build a life together, and create something beautiful and lasting. They are proof that love and courage can overcome any obstacle. They are an inspiration to us all, and I am honored to call them friends. As the evening wound down and guests began to depart, Isaac and Teresa stood on their porch watching the last wagons drive away. The ranch was quiet again, and the stars were brilliant overhead in the clear Wyoming sky. "Tired?" Isaac asked. "Happily tired," Teresa replied. "It was a perfect day." They went inside, where Sarah had already cleaned up and left everything orderly. The house was quiet but held the pleasant echo of the celebration. In their bedroom, Teresa sat at her dressing table, removing the pins from her hair while Isaac watched. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, catching his eye in the mirror. "About how lucky I am, about how different my life would be if you had not hidden in my root cellar that night." Teresa turned to face him. "Do you think fate brought us together? Or was it just chance? I do not know. But I do know that I would choose you, over and over in any circumstance. You are my heart, Teresa. You always have been." She moved into his arms and they held each other close. Outside, the wind whispered across the prairie, carrying the scent of sage and the distant sound of cattle. Inside, two people who had found each other against all odds stood together, grateful for every moment, every challenge, every joy they had shared. The years continued to be kind to the Lawsons. The ranch remained prosperous, the family stayed close, and Isaac and Teresa grew old together with grace and continued affection. They sat on their porch on summer evenings, watching sunsets and counting grandchildren. They attended church socials and town events, respected members of the community they had helped build. Isaac's hair turned silver, and Teresa's showed threads of white, but their love remained as strong as ever. They still reached for each other in the night, still shared private jokes and meaningful glances, still found joy in each other's company after decades together. When Isaac was 62, he suffered a heart episode that frightened the entire family. For a terrifying week, Teresa sat by his bedside, holding his hand and praying with an intensity she had not felt since those dangerous days of her youth. But Isaac recovered, though the doctor warned him to take things easier. Matthew took over complete management of the ranch operations, allowing Isaac to advise and consult, but not exhaust himself with physical labor. Isaac chafed at the restrictions at first, but Teresa insisted. "We have earned the right to slow down," she told him firmly. "Let our children do the heavy work. We can enjoy what we have built." So they entered a gentler phase of life, spending their days in each other's company, visiting with grandchildren, and taking pleasure in simple things. Isaac taught his grandsons to whittle and shared stories of his cavalry days. Teresa taught her granddaughters to bake and told them about growing up in Chicago. On a clear autumn day in 1903, Isaac and Teresa celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary quietly, with just their immediate family. They sat together at dinner, surrounded by children and grandchildren, and reflected on everything they had experienced together. 30 years, Matthew said, raising his glass. To my parents who taught us all what love and partnership truly mean, may you have many more years together. Everyone drank the toast, and then Sarah stood. I would like to say something as well. When I was young, I asked Mother once how she knew Father was the right man for her. She told me that he saw her at her most vulnerable and afraid, and instead of taking advantage, he offered protection and kindness. She said that how a man treats someone with no power and no ability to repay him tells you everything about his character. That lesson has guided my life. Teresa reached for Isaac's hand under the table, squeezing gently. He squeezed back, his eyes bright with emotion. Daniel stood last. Father taught me that courage is not the absence of fear, but choosing to do what is right even when you are afraid. He protected Mother when it would have been easier to turn away. He built this ranch with his own hands and taught us to take pride in our work. Everything good in my life I owe to the example he and Mother set. After dinner, when the family had left and quiet had returned, Isaac and Teresa walked slowly around their property. They moved carefully, both feeling their age, but the evening was beautiful and they wanted to enjoy it together. "You remember the first time we walked this land together?" Isaac asked. "You were learning to ride, and you were so determined not to show fear even though you had never been on a horse before. I remember thinking that everything about ranch life was foreign and challenging, but that I wanted to learn because it was your world. I wanted to be part of it. You became more than part of it. You shaped it, made it better. This ranch would not be what it is without you." They stood looking out over the land they had worked and loved for 30 years. The fence lines Isaac had built, the pastures Teresa had helped plan, the buildings they had raised together. Every inch held memories, sweat, triumph, and the deep satisfaction of work well done. "I would not change a single thing," Teresa said softly. "Not the fear, not the danger, not the hardship. It all led to this, to us, to our family. It was all worth it." Isaac pulled her close, and they stood together in the gathering twilight, two people who had found each other in the most unlikely circumstances and built something extraordinary. Their love story had begun with fear and flight, but it had become something beautiful and enduring, a testament to courage, faith, and the power of two people committed to each other and to building a life together. As darkness fell and they finally went inside, the ranch settled into peaceful quiet. Cattle lowed softly in the distance, horses moved in their stalls, and somewhere an owl called to its mate. The Lawson Ranch slept under the vast Wyoming sky, solid and secure, a legacy of love that would endure for generations to come. Isaac and Teresa Lawson lived many more years together, their love never diminishing even as their bodies aged. They saw more grandchildren born, celebrated more anniversaries, and continued to be the heart of their large, loving family. When Isaac finally passed peacefully in his sleep at age 76, Teresa grieved deeply but found comfort in their children and the life they had built together. She lived 5 more years, spending her time with family, working in her beloved garden, and keeping Isaac's memory alive through stories and love. When she died at age 73, she was buried beside him on a hillside overlooking the ranch, under a stone that read simply, "Teresa Lawson, beloved wife, mother, and grandmother." Their children and grandchildren continued the ranch, expanding and adapting to the changing times, but never forgetting the foundation Isaac and Teresa had laid. The story of how they met, of the terrified woman hiding in the root cellar and the rancher who had protected her, became family legend, told and retold to each new generation as an example of courage, love, and the extraordinary things that can happen when two people commit to building a life together. The Lawson Ranch stood for over a century, a lasting monument to a love that had begun in darkness and fear, but had grown into something bright and beautiful that blessed everyone it touched.